Habs trade rumors are escalating once again as NHL insider Chris Johnston has linked the Montreal Canadiens once again to multiple big-name centers on the trade market, including one out of Boston and one from the New York Islanders. We have to dive into Pavel Zacha and Bo Horvat's names and some other supporting documentation or quotes, we should say, on this whole situation, but not just that. We have a new quote from Jacob Fowler after last night's dominant performance. Mr. Calm in net. Shades of a certain old Habs goalie. Won't get too far on that. We got a bunch of stuff coming up on this episode of Habs Digest. You know, we will start with Jacob Fowler because, oh my gosh, he deserves as much of the love as we can give him. What a performance. 0 goals allowed. Only, 1 or 2 in the shootout. He was unbelievable the whole night. And he's so calm. That's the big thing. And when asked about it, he said it's something that I've had my whole life. I grew up just loving the game so much, just trying to be a hockey dork. Like, it's just part of who I am. I love to come to the rink every day. It's not a job for me. And that is incredibly evident when you watch him play. Again, shades of Carey Price. We're not the only ones who are noticing that. Not saying he's gonna be the level of goalie Carey Price was, but you can't help but...
Yes, we are.
Okay, you know, why not? Why not? Let's say it. But Jesse, again, the calmness is the biggest factor for me in the way he looks on the ice, the way he behaves. And for him to say this, like, I don't know. I feel like he's almost like, I don't know. Maybe I'm going too far, but this is unreal to see and hear nonetheless.
You totally are. I'm right there with you. Like, for me, and as you can tell, it's like favorite player type energy that I'm getting right now from Jacob Fowler. Like, that's how impressive last night's performance was. Like, it really exceeded all expectations here, where he really came in and you could feel like a shift in the game right away of that calming kind of, you know, just presence that he really have, I think is the best way to describe. And like, again, taking over for Samuel Montembeault, like an NHL caliber goalie, I think even just speaks that much more. It's really like not just what he did, Josh, but how he did it that really just instilled such confidence and really just calmness in this team, which was just phenomenal to see. And again, really blown away because it's the best of both worlds. Because one thing we've gotten to know from Jacob Fowler is like, he's kind of like a fiery guy and he's really a competitor, right? And it's that way that it kind of makes you think of like a Patrick Roy and like the fire that he has, but then he gets in nets and then just square to the puck and tracking so well. And then you're feeling Carey Price vibes. And again, like, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves for sure, but like, there is a legacy where we've just been spoiled in Montreal with just having great goalies. And we've come to expect it, Josh, right? Like there's obviously Jacques Plante to Ken Dryden, passing the torch to Patrick Roy, Carey Price, you know, and it's just so funny that very shortly thereafter that possibly Jacob Fowler could be the heir apparent. And again, like, we don't want to disrespect like Samuel Montembeault, who's doing such a great job for this team right now. But I think we just have to say, like, there was something special about last night's performance that is really getting us and, you know, excited and feeling this way.
I swear every single reaction to that save that we've shown you a bunch of times already was like, well, maybe not every single one, but the majority were like shades of Price, gifts of Price, or even some of Patrick Roy. And like, again, I feel like sometimes us as fans, like maybe it's like too much pressure on his shoulders, but I don't think he feels it. Like he doesn't seem like the kind of guy that feels it, or if he does feel it, it uses its fuel, right? The dude has felt pressure his whole life, but he said he's been doubted his whole life. Whoever would have thought the guy from Melbourne, Florida, to come up, be a Habs fan as a kid? Anyway, it's an unreal story. We love what we're seeing from Fowler. Leave some love for him down below. This is just the beginning of something very special for him, but we're going to transition pretty quickly. We got some other very interesting trade talk to get into. Now, this is recorded before the Habs versus Flyers game, so, you know, but we're not going to talk about that today. Maybe take a look for another video coming out soon, but we want to talk about some recent talk that Chris Johnston said on the Leaf Report. Talking more about the Leafs, but he mentions Montreal's name in here too, saying maybe some veteran forwards become available, whether it's Pavel Zacha in Boston or Bo Horvat with the Islanders, players that could satisfy the needs in places like Montreal, Vancouver, maybe even Toronto. And the reason that we're kind of gravitating to this is, yes, it is just a maybe they can become available, but it's two names that have been consistently named on the trade market. Bo Horvat kind of fell off for a bit. We're still not sure, but again, it all depends on how the Islanders season starts, I would say. But Zacha, especially in recent weeks, has been a big subject of conversation. And Frank Saravalli recently said, I think if someone stepped up and made the right offer, that he's gettable. He said that just yesterday on Canucks Central. And we know from a few weeks ago, RG.org, this article is linked down below, which teams are in the mix for Pavel Zacha. This was from Jimmy Murphy's reporting. The Habs have inquired. Why Montreal's pursuit of Zacha notable? Well, a deal would be the first trade between the Habs and Bruins roster trade since 2001. So to focus on Zacha for a second, like, again, these names, they're not just out there for no reason, right? The fact that Montreal has been linked specifically to Zacha, and even to some extent Horvat earlier in the summer, it just lends credence to why, like, the kind of guys that Kent Hughes could be willing to maybe overpay for. Who knows? Zacha is a little less of a commitment, a smaller contract, just 2 years. But he's 6'3", he fits the bill of getting a good amount of points while having a good face-off percentage. Jesse, you think this is maybe becoming, I don't want to say more inevitable day by day, and I'm not saying this is going to happen before the season, but teams like Boston and the New York Islanders, these are two teams that, to me, could be prone to slow starts, and it could facilitate a trade rather quickly this year.
Yeah, you have to feel like, the Bruins are definitely looking for some prospects. But like with Zacha, with both players, Horvat and Zacha, I think there's two different situations here, and we'll kind of get into both of them. But like with Zacha, I really feel like it is a situation where the Habs, given the ammunition that Kent Hughes has, he could definitely make this trade happen. But I feel like he's holding out just given the very, rare nature of guys like Sidney Crosby potentially becoming available. I mean, how often does that become up? Like, we want to pull the trigger on this for a long second. Like, okay, maybe let's just wait for a second and kind of see how this plays out. I think probably some other players, McTavish, obviously that whole situation is a reason why we haven't seen a Zacha trade yet here. That being said, like, while he's not the perfect fit, and that's why the trade hasn't been made yet, he would be an improvement over what we have right now. And not to read too much early on, it's like just from last night's game, we are seeing how having somebody at the 2C who can really finish plays will be a huge advantage for the Montreal Canadiens. Because right now, Ivan Demidov's skill has shown us that he's going to pull like a very high skill plays, and only high skill players are really going to be able to finish that, or at least a certain tier that we'd really come to expect. So again, I think that's very interesting just to consider Demidov, like in all of this, like getting his confidence really going early on, I think, could be very important to consider in all this. And we know that there hasn't been a trade for a long time. That being said, I think Montreal is in the best position to give the Bruins exactly what they're looking for. So if it's, strictly business that we're talking about here, I think potentially it could make sense here, but there are other factors at play, which we'll need to get into in just a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like, it's a good fit, and it's less of a commitment. Again, the question is how much you'd have to give up. And you always assume in like an interdivision trade, like within the division, I should say, plus a rivalry trade, like, you're probably going to have to pay that extra tax. Now, I don't know if Kent Hughes is in the good books with the Bruins or not after being Patrice Bergeron's agent. Who knows how that plays a role? Like, there's all these outside factors. But, like, regardless, Pavel Zacha is the most available of pretty much any guy that could fit that 2C bill that we have seen. I think objectively, he's the guy that's been in the most trade talks. The Bruins have not been shy about making it known he's available for trade. And the Habs, hey, they make some sense. But again, it's not just him. We got to circle back to Bo Horvat, the other guy mentioned here. And it's been a while since we've talked about him because, look, the Islanders, Matthew Darche, he's kind of been like, no, I have no plans to move him. But again, like, once the season starts, you have some questions that start to get answered. Look, if Matthew Schaefer comes in and he's an amazing number 1 D right away, which by some accounts of what's going on in training camp, he could be really good. We knew that anyway, but they have some good players coming in. But if they start off really slow and they fall out of the playoff picture well before the trade deadline, you really never know. And a guy like Horvat, Jesse, is the kind of guy, look, we know he's been the captain, but the big thing, 57 points, 68 points, 70 points in the last 3 seasons, 58.2% on the dot in over 1,300 faceoffs last year. Unbelievable. 54% the year before that, 57 the year before that, 57, 53, 57. One of the best faceoff guys in the league. He's had Selke votes 3 different years within his career. He's a 2-time All-Star. The only problem with him, well, I say not the only one, the biggest one is, again, his contract at $8.5 million, which would cap strap Montreal. But again, if we're talking about guys that could fit that 2C bill, other than Crosby, like, I feel Horvat is Horvat's closer to that Crosby level of guy than Zacha is. Plus, he's better on the dot and he gets more points, but he's a bigger commitment. So again, there's strengths and weaknesses to each of these guys, Jesse, but I just love to see that the Habs seem to be involved in pretty much everything here, even if it's just a little speculative conversation, because we should be. This is the kind of guy, again, that could absolutely fit that bill if the right deal came into place.
And interesting to hear other sources joining this conversation of late as well with Bo Horvat. And we know that the caveat in this situation, as you mentioned, is really Matthew Darche, and his playoff aspirations for this team, their new general manager here. That being said, the question's going to come down to is like, how long is that leash? And it's really going to be dependent on the performance of him deciding when are we going to really try and make the playoffs, or when do we maybe kind of, throw in the towel for this year and really try to improve our shots at the draft. Because I think there's kind of two things where it's like the Montreal Canadiens have shown, unless a perfect situation arrives, like a McTavish, which I think they pulled the trigger on right away, is that really like they're going to give Kirby Dach like a month or 2 months. I think that's fair, but you want to get in the sweet spot of like you want to give them time, Josh. But I think you don't want to hurt the team by maybe waiting too long to make a change if it's not working out at the 2C. So that'll be interesting to see where, the Islanders line is in terms of when they're maybe ready to maybe do that. And if that lines up with what's going on here in Montreal, obviously a very fluid situation. Yeah. And the contract, a lot is made of that, the duration. I definitely get that. That being said, as I alluded to on the live last night, I think having a veteran at that 2C, if you want to have success earlier on in the playoffs with the Montreal Canadiens, is the way to go. If you're okay maybe having success maybe a little bit later on and have that kind of build that up a little bit more, think you're okay getting that younger 2C, but I think that veteran presence is an absolute must to have success in your forward core, in the top six even. Like, I know we got Gallagher, I know we got Anderson, but they're not the ones on the ice as much as really your 2C, hopefully here. So I think that's just so important, bringing that sandpaper, which again, like Martin St. Louis has mentioned, is something that's like a really big element for his team. I think that's maybe really insightful for like whether Florian Xhekaj does get the inside edge on making this team, as them having addressed that being a huge part they want to improve. Totally right, by the way. So I think that may be in line with what Kent Hughes might be thinking going forward, which again just makes this a more of a possibility because he's obviously a very interesting player. If we're kind of getting rid of the pipe dream and we get into like what could very realistically happen, I think like that's very close to an ideal situation. Obviously, with a little bit of salary retention, might be even more palatable.
Oh, that would be insane if we could somehow get some salary retention. You really never know. Like, it all depends on the team situation. And again, like you said, maybe a bit of sandpaper, maybe more than some people would expect from Horvat. A career high 100 hits last year. Career high when you're like 30 years old is pretty impressive. He's playing with some physicality. Look, he's effective on the offensive and defensive side of the ice. So listen, leave your thoughts on all this down below, because they're two names that are going to be linked to the Habs until they are traded or until they're not linked, basically, or until we fill that void. So they're very interesting, and I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on it. But that'll do it for this episode of Habs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel, guys. Thank you so much. The season, it's basically here at this point. We got another game against the Flyers tonight. You're probably watching this before or after, and if it's after, leave your thoughts. Leave all your thoughts down below. I'm Josh Gosse for my co-host Jesse Poirier. We'll catch you in the next one.